heartless killer hides in plain sight. It's a respected doctor, murdering his own patients.
He was preying on some of the most vulnerable people in society.
Dr. Harold Shipman's secret rampage lasts for decades.
He'd been murdering people for years and getting away with it.
And he's not the only one. There are doctors and nurses haunting hospitals, known as angels of death.
Are motivated by the kind of godlike power that they feel, being responsible for life or death.
What creates these cold-blooded monsters? What drives their warped psyche?
He did things that went above and beyond what was necessary to kill a patient. There was an element of cruelty.
Now, the actual voices and visions of serial killers.
I wasn't born evil.
But you committed evil.
I committed evil.
Plunge us deep inside their complex and twisted minds. June 24th, 1998. Dr. Harold Shipman arrives at the home of one of his patients, 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy. Kathleen has agreed to participate in a medical survey on older, healthy women. It's a terrible decision for the vibrant senior citizen.
She's a very busy person, wasn't she? A very busy person, yeah.
Well, she did do quite a number of charitable things and also community things.
Inside, Dr. Shipman has Kathleen lie down and roll up her sleeve. But rather than taking a blood sample, as Kathleen expects, Shipman injects her with a fatal dose of morphine.
I was just at work as normal, and then I had a telephone call from the police saying that my mother had died.
Stunned by their mother's sudden death, Kathleen's children contact Dr. Shipman for an explanation.
He gave us the death certificate and he said, I've put old age. And we knew perfectly well that that wasn't right. But then he sort of vaguely implied that that he'd seen her recently and so he knew the case, so it wasn't. And he was basically trying to say that he was going to avoid a post-mortem because that would be unpleasant for us.
The doctor's calm demeanor and reassurance puts the Woodruffs at ease. But 3 weeks later, they receive another shock.
The will, which some solicitors sent to me.
The fact that it left all of the estate to Shipman, which, if you'd known Kathleen in a relationship to us, to the family, that would have been extraordinarily unlikely.
Suspecting Dr. Shipman murdered their mother for profit, the Woodruffs contact the police. What they soon uncover proves unimaginable. The beloved doctor, a pillar of the community with over 3,000 patients, has been systematically murdering them for over 25 years.
Had Angela not come forward, there is no doubt that he would have continued to murder people. There was nothing that was going to stop him. He'd been murdering people for years and getting away with it.
Cases of doctors and nurses who kill have been documented throughout history. These horror stories highlight how people in trusted positions and access to vulnerable patients can abuse in the worst way possible. Oftentimes, these angels of death serial killers can go undetected for years.
Angels of death are serial killers who actually are abusing a position of power that they may have, where they could be a caretaker or a doctor, somebody who is supposed to be helping people, and they actually use it to kill their victims.
An angel of death is the name, a little bit too glorified in its essence, of nurses and physicians who kill one patient after another, usually by injecting One succinylcholine or some curare-like drug, and some of them have killed very large numbers of patients in that manner.
There seem to be a number of motivations behind that kind of serial killing, which doesn't involve torture or any sexual component. It's just sort of repeat murders. But it seems that some of them are motivated by the kind of godlike power that they feel, being responsible for life or death. Some of them will tell you that it was almost like coming from an empathy where they were putting someone out of their misery, that kind of a thing. And others were drawn to the kind of the egocentric thrill of having everybody run to see that, they were there at the moment that somebody started to die.
Dr. Harold Shipman is the most horrific example of an angel of death, becoming Britain's most prolific serial killer. Shipman owns his own practice, but specializes in house calls, visiting his elderly and infirmed patients in their homes.
Everybody, without exception, had the highest of praise for Dr. Shipman, what a wonderful doctor he was. And people said he was very, very accessible.
He had this reputation of looking after his patients from cradle to grave. He prided himself on personal care. He would look after patients at home where maybe we would send them to hospital. He sort of took pride in that, and he had a reputation of always being available for patients. He would go beyond the normal call of duty. He was the old-fashioned doctor who looked after them, did everything for them, and they had absolute confidence in.
Officials estimate over 200 times the beloved doctor injects his victims with lethal doses of morphine, often while offering a calming pat on their hands as they slowly pass away.
One of the defining features of Shipman is where he didn't choose to strangle them or do something that would be more frightening and painful. Instead, he injected them with an overdose of morphine, where they first went to sleep and then eventually overdosed and died.
Predatory, I think, is the best way to describe him. He was preying on some of the most vulnerable people in society.
Perhaps most astonishing is that Shipman gets away with it for over 25 years. As a boy, Harold was very close to his mother. She instilled in him an early sense of superiority that tainted most of his later relationships. While in his teens, Shipman became interested in medicine while watching his mother receive daily morphine injections to ease the pain she suffered while dying of lung cancer. One day, when he was 17, Shipman comes home to find his mother sitting in her armchair, fully clothed, dead. Her death has a very traumatic impact. In fact, many of the women Shipman kills are found in a similar manner.
Shipman had a passive-aggressive relationship with his mother where he both sought her attention, but he constantly was being rebuked by her, where she would put him off and she would put him down, but he constantly wanted her approval and attention. When he was 17, however, he came home one day and just saw her sitting there dead in her chair. And so that was very traumatic for him because he felt like he was never really able to attain that approval from her, and he no longer had the chance to do it since she had passed away.
In 1970, Shipman receives a medical degree from Leeds University. A few years later, he becomes a general practitioner in Yorkshire. Shipman thrives, specializing in pediatrics, obstetrics, and gynecology. In 1975, hospital officials discover he's been forging prescriptions for large amounts of the opiate pethidine for his own personal use. Caught red-handed, Shipman has no choice but to resign, pay a small fine, and enter a drug rehab program. After his rehabilitation, Shipman finds work again, this time at the Donnybrook Medical Center in Hyde. Here, Shipman earns a reputation as a hard-working doctor who enjoys the trust of patients and colleagues alike, although one with a reputation for arrogance.
Almost sort of very sort of condescending, you know, as if dismissing you as you're viewed as being worthless. Particularly when he was talking to pharmaceutical reps who would come in. He would take great pleasure in almost reducing them to tears.
It's not known when Shipman starts killing his patients, or exactly how many die at his hands. What is known is that while working at Donnybrook, Shipman kills regularly using the painkiller diamorphine. To destroy any evidence of poisoning, Shipman urges families to cremate their relatives. In a large number of cases, he stresses that no further investigation of their deaths is necessary. In situations where they do raise questions, Shipman provides computerized medical notes that corroborate his cause of death pronouncements.
I find all of his behaviour that's subsequently come out as almost incomprehensible, really. It goes against all our sort of ethics and morals of why we do the job, really.
After 15 years at Donnybrook, Shipman leaves to open his own practice. The Angel of Death's murder rate accelerates, and the killings become more and more brazen. But before police can end these murders, they must first recognize there's a serial killer at large. How can they catch a murderer who has totally covered his tracks? Doctors and nurses who kill, so-called angels of death, often abuse their position for their own ego and godlike narcissism. History's most horrific example is Dr. Harold Shipman, who is reported to have murdered more than 200 of his patients. A series of killings lasting more than 25 years. His crimes first came to light in 1998, following the sudden death of a healthy 81-year-old woman, Kathleen Grundy. Investigators find that Shipman's murders accelerate when he opens a private practice in 1993. This is a one-doctor office where he works alone and without any oversight. No one is there to notice Shipman's death rates and prescription rates are extremely high. As is the case with other serial killers, the more Shipman kills and gets away with it, the more brazen he becomes, efficiently and ruthlessly murdering dozens, including in some cases, more than one person in a single family. Shipman would visit his victims, all females, most over 65, treating them as if he were an old friend. But then, after injecting them with morphine, Shipman often left them to die alone. He goes back to his office to backdate their medical records and falsify their death certificates, attributing the incident to natural causes.
I think one of the difficulties with that earlier investigation was getting over the sort of credibility gap was something that I refer to it as being, which was that, is it true what we're saying, that there was a doctor murdering people? He selected people who were vulnerable in the community, and they tended to be people who were living alone.
Another complicating issue in stopping Shipman is that he did not fit the typical serial killer profile. One investigator calls Shipman the dullest serial killer I have ever met. His benign appearance and affable demeanor, however, did belie his pervasive narcissism. Shipman's motives remain controversial. While some experts speculate he was seeking to avenge the death of his mother, others suggest it was euthanasia. Some believe there were financial motives, and others say it was for power and control.
For a lot of these angels of death, there is a literal God complex that they have where they want to feel like they have the ability in their control to actually give or take life. And so for them, they may choose, well, this person will live and this person will die. And for them, that gives them this huge ego rush where they feel like they're the ultimate God, they're ultimately in control.
There's also an element of the angel of death wanting to be perceived as a hero.
There's a theme within angels of death where they may actually be killing somebody, but as soon as others get aware to the fact that this person is dying, they actually will change their behaviors entirely to appear as if they're resuscitating this person, trying to save them. And a way to think of this is the arsonist who's actually the firefighter, where they're the ones who set the fire and then come there to put it out. They want that glory. They want to be the hero. And so they're not only able to kill somebody and get the gratification that comes from that, they're also able to get the gratification of appearing to be the hero in the scenario.
Shipman's killing spree finally comes to light thanks to the determination of Angela Woodruff, the daughter of Kathleen Grundy. Angela Woodruff is a lawyer and handles her mother's affairs. So it is with great surprise that she discovers a will exists, leaving the bulk of her mother's estate to Dr. Shipman. Detective Superintendent Bernard Postes comes to the same conclusion on examination of the evidence. Kathleen Grundy's body is exhumed, and a post-mortem reveals that she has died of a morphine overdose administered within 3 hours of her death, precisely within the time frame of Shipman's visit. On the same day as the exhumation, the police raid Shipman's home and office. The search yields hundreds of medical records, an odd collection of women's jewelry, and an old manual typewriter, which was later proved to have been used to forge Kathleen Grundy's will.
He suggested that the typewriter was something that had been borrowed on a number of occasions by Kathleen Grundy. What he couldn't explain was when it was that she'd actually returned it, if that indeed that was true.
A review of Shipman's medical records makes it clear that this investigation extends beyond a single death.
This was the tip of the iceberg, was how I was viewing it at that stage.
Shipman would alter his medical notes directly after killing the patient to ensure that his account matches the historical records. What Shipman had failed to grasp was that each alteration of the records would be time-stamped by the computer, enabling police to ascertain exactly which records had been altered.
He wasn't as clever as he thought he was in being able to explain his way out of this.
On September 7th, 1998, the police arrest the 52-year-old Shipman for the murder of Kathleen Grundy. The news sends shockwaves across the community. As word spreads, suspicion mounts that there may have been other victims. Investigators decide they must dig up more graves.
Personally, it took a great toll on me. I would describe it as being the worst time in my life. Off the top of my head, I attended about 7 or 8. After a while, I got more used to going to the cemetery at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. To be in the cemetery at 4 o'clock on a cold winter, dark morning, it got right through your bones. It was very, very unpleasant because as the remains were exhumed, you became very aware of the smell.
The exhumations and subsequent tests prove Shipman has been murdering a number of his patients. Shipman maintains his innocence, claiming he's been acting compassionately. But it is clear from the medical records and toxicology reports that none of his victims were suffering from a terminal illness. The police eventually charged Shipman with 15 individual counts of murder, as well as 1 count of forgery. On January 31st, 2000, a jury finds Shipman guilty on all charges.
Relatives of Harold Shipman's victims left court tonight knowing that one of the most dangerous men seen in Britain during the last century had been permanently removed from society.
Sadly, nothing that's happened here, nor can happen in the future, can bring back my mum and all the other victims.
I think it was mixed emotions. It was, again, satisfaction that he'd been convicted and been convicted of every one of the counts in the indictment.
Four years later, on January 13th, 2004, Shipman performs his last planned death. Alone in his cell, Shipman uses bed sheets wrapped around his neck and tied to the window bars to hang himself. Officially, Harold Shipman is convicted of killing 15, but ultimately he is believed to have murdered between 200 and 300 patients. One of the problems faced by investigators is that several victims had been cremated, making death certification impossible. Whatever the exact number, the sheer scale of his murderous activities means that Shipman is catapulted from a single patient killer to the most prolific known serial killer in the world.
He had this overwhelming sense of narcissism that he not only thought of himself as being so grandiose and so high above others, but he actually had this godlike concept where he felt like he could choose who he was going to kill, when, and why. And that's something that you see only with very extreme narcissists.
One reason Harold Shipman is able to evade authorities for so long was that his murders are scattered among his patients' homes. But incredibly, there is another angel of death who confines his murders to a spot people think of as the safest possible place: the hospital. Harold Shipman is a trusted family doctor who has been killing patients to experience a godlike thrill. Another angel of death is only a hospital orderly, but he gains enormous power by deciding who lives or dies. "88-year-old stroke victim Logan Evans lays helpless in bed, unable to control his bodily functions. When the orderly, Donald Harvey, arrives for his nightly cleanup, Evans smears feces onto Harvey's face. Suddenly, the 18-year-old orderly snaps, grabs a pillow, and smothers Evans to death. It is only after his victim is dead that Donald Harvey realizes what he has done. But rather than becoming scared, this act of anger empowers Harvey. Suddenly, after always being told what to do, he called the shots. He decided who would live and who would die. While working at Marymount Hospital, Donald Harvey, still just a teenager, murders 14 more patients. He later moves to other hospitals, and this despicable angel of death claims over 70 more victims. What could cause such a cold-blooded serial killer to emerge? Once again, an abusive childhood seems to come into play.
In childhood, Donald Harvey was pretty neglected by his parents. They were constantly fighting, and even though he was the eldest, he was more caring for his siblings than receiving the attention that a child should. Additionally, he was being abused sexually by his uncle and a neighbor, and so all of that was very traumatic for him growing up.
Harvey's killing begins in 1970, but he isn't apprehended until 1987. After his arrest, he lays partial blame on this childhood trauma.
The amount of trauma and abuse that Donald Harvey felt during childhood, even though it was severe, it became normalized to him, where he thought this must be what other people go through, or because he had no other experience, he just thought this is the way it is, and he knew nothing different.
Donald Harvey did things sometimes that went above and beyond what was necessary to kill a patient, so that there was an element of cruelty. So for example, while he killed the vast majority of his charges through poison, there was also incidents of him snaking a coat hanger into the catheter of patients to puncture the organs, to puncture them internally, so that peritonitis would set in and the individual would die slowly from that.
In 1971, when Harvey leaves Marymount to join the military, his killing spree stops. It picks up again when Harvey joins the nursing staff at the VA hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio. During his 2-year stint there, Harvey is believed to have murdered another 17 patients. And it was here that Harvey perfects the art of using cyanide and arsenic in small, lethal, undetectable doses so his killings can go unnoticed. And, for the most part, they did. No one who comes into contact with him knows the demons that lurk beneath his skin. The power over life and death goes to Harvey's head.
One commonality between the angels of death and other types of serial killers is the fact that they have this strong need for power and control. It's ultimately the most defining feature of the angels of death.
Harvey's killing spree at the VA hospital comes to an end when officials discover a gun, books on the occult, syringes, and slides of human tissue in his hospital locker. But rather than firing him, they let him resign, enabling Harvey to move on to another job, this time at nearby Daniel Drake Memorial Hospital. Just 6 weeks into his new position, the self-described Angel of Mercy strikes again. Harvey feels unstoppable.
It's easy to imagine how addictive it would be to be able to take someone's life, get away with it, and then be able to do it again and again and again, and the high that might come with that, and also the empowerment with every single time you do it, getting away with it.
In a span of 5 months, Harvey kills 6 more patients without any remorse and without leaving a trace. But eventually, in March of 1987, an autopsy is performed on a victim. As the coroner cuts open the body, he smells the telltale scent of bitter almonds wafting up from the dead man's organs. He immediately identifies the smell as cyanide. Suddenly, everyone working at the hospital becomes a suspect in a murder investigation. Rumors surface about how his co-workers nicknamed Donald Harvey the Angel of Death, not because they suspect any crimes, but because he is so often present when a patient passed away. Investigators decide to search Harvey's home and discover 30 pounds of cyanide. They also find, as did his former employers at the VA hospital, books on the occult and a list of victims yet to be killed by Harvey. On April 6, 1987, the police arrest Harvey, charging him with 1 count of aggravated murder. When they ask him if he had killed others, he simply nods. He doesn't know the exact figure, maybe around 70. Harvey consents to a chilling prison interview. In the session, he details the years of sexual molestation.
My uncle had started messing around with me when I was 4 years old. And he was 13 and I was almost 4. And what he would do with me would be in a sexual sense, and I thought all the other little boys would do the same thing. And since I act like my mother, act like a little girl, so he started messing around with me.
How long does this go on for, this sexual molestation of you?
Well, my uncle and I went on to, I was almost 21, and the neighbor man till I was 15 or 16. I don't like to think of myself as evil, no.
But people think you're crazy, you're mad.
Some do, some don't.
You're not mad.
No.
You chose to do what you did.
I chose to do what I did, and I can't blame. I can't blame my mother. I can't blame my uncle.
Why can't you blame him?
He contributed, but he didn't tell me to keep going on and on and on doing what I was doing.
How many people have you killed in total?
Just a total of 87.
Harvey is asked whether he thinks people are born evil or do they become evil.
I think everyone, unless they're born with some mental problem, I don't think anyone's born evil. I think it's man-made.
You weren't born evil.
No, I wasn't born evil.
But you committed evil.
I committed evil.
In exchange for escaping the death penalty, Harvey pleads guilty and confesses to 13 killings. He is sentenced to 28 life sentences.
A lot of times guys come up to me and say, well, I tell them I'm in here with you. I mean, you know, in the pod where I live, and they say, oh, he's evil, he's a monster. Because they immediately think, once you leave the street in cuffs, they think you become something else.
But very few people kill 80 people. What you did was monstrous.
That we know of. There's others out there. I'm not the only one, by a long shot.
On March 30th, 2017, Donald Harvey is found beaten to death in his prison cell. As horrific as his crimes appear, there is another angel of death that eclipses all others in the unspeakable brutality of their serial murders. One of the most insidious breeds of serial killers are the monsters known as angels of death. Doctors, nurses, and caregivers who murder their patients. Britain's Dr. Harold Shipman may be the most prolific serial killer of all time, murdering over 250 patients. While Donald Harvey, a hospital orderly, admits to 87 deaths. There have been numerous cases around the world of nurses, so-called angels of mercy, turning into angels of death. Perhaps the most heartless of all these serial killers is maternity nurse Maria Fialova. She is believed to have murdered at least 10 newborn babies beginning in 1957. Her killing spree ends abruptly 3 years later. February 23, 1960. 2 newborn infants are found dead in the Psyche hospital in the Czech Republic. Both are girls. One is 5 weeks old. The other is just 20 hours old. The babies are victims of extreme violence. Both have cracked skulls. 4 days later, Maria Fialova is arrested for the crimes, and the 23-year-old nurse gives a gruesome confession and reveals a troubling past. She grew up in Psyche. Apparently, her father was abusive to Marie and her mentally challenged brother, and she often fought with her mother. But despite this difficult childhood, in 1955, Marie enters nursing school and is considered an excellent student with a bright future. Her school records give her a glowing report. Maria Fialova has completed all the prerequisites for her chosen profession. She will be a good, conscientious nurse and a reliable caregiver for babies. She is capable of handling responsibility and can work well independently. After graduation, Marie is hired at Psyche Hospital. By all accounts, she appears to be an excellent maternity ward nurse.
Like with other serial killer cases, Maria Fialkova's peers were taken completely by surprise. Marie seemed to be a very professional, competent, and punctual person. This was very apparent, and at work she was very well evaluated. This isn't really surprising, as even serial killers have these little so-called islands of normality.
With her shocking confession, she recounts the numerous horrible crimes she's carried out over the years. She even poses for photographs, demonstrating how she murdered the infants.
Before killing the last 2 babies, named Prosser and Hamelbauer, I had beaten another 10 children who died as a result of my beatings. I want to add that I remember some of the names of the deceased children, and I gave those names to the prosecutors, but many of the names I don't remember.
She describes her first murder in 1957, 3 years before her arrest.
I don't remember the name of the baby or the mother, but I clearly remember beating the infant in the chest and head. That is what killed the child.
During her arrest, she acted very calm and natural. Her entire behavior can be summarized as resigned, and she lacked any empathy whatsoever. That means she described her crimes in the hospital with absolutely no emotion. She also mentioned that the first attack on the baby was committed without any suspicion by the others on the medical team. She understood this as a clear indicator of not needing to worry about getting caught, and she could just carry on with what she was doing.
Lékařského týmu, takže to vnímala jako moment, že se nemusí vůbec ničeho bát a že tedy mohla pokračovat.
Even crimes as heinous as murdering newborn babies are escaping detection. How can this cunning angel of death be stopped? In Psyche Hospital in the Czech Republic, a seemingly kind and compassionate maternity nurse named Maria Fialova is actually a serial killer. She has murdered at least 10 newborn babies entrusted to her care. In her chilling confession, she details how she killed 2 infants on the same day, February 23, 1960.
On February 23rd, around 11 a.m., I was in the maternity unit where I was ironing diapers. Hannah Hamelbauer was laying behind me. She was about 6 weeks old. She was crying, and it made me angry and nervous. That's why I turned and slammed her in the head, and with my hand slightly closed. I did it because I was upset and very stressed. They didn't know there was a problem with the baby until the next day when she wouldn't drink. The day after that, she died.
Marie continues, detailing her murder of the Prosser baby. The newborn is just 20 hours old.
When I was pressing the head of the Prosser baby, I felt my fingers pushing into her skull. I felt the scrunch of the head, but I wasn't sure I was breaking the bones. But I was aware that after this push, she stopped crying, but she had to die.
Na případu Marie Fikáčkové je zajímavé zaprvé to, že byla velmi mladá.
Maria Fikáčkova's case is interesting because of her young age when she was committing her crimes. Also, the fact that she was committing these crimes on newborns. That is really atypical because killers in the Angels of Death category usually focus on old people nearing the end of their lives, usually suffering some terminal illness. Their motives are usually considered to be helping the victim. But in time, we discover that the real motivation is in power and control over the victims. She was beating the babies, beat them with her fists, beat them on their chests, beat them to their heads.
When police arrest Maria Fikáčkova on February 27th, she reacts calmly and says she is actually relieved at finally being caught. The motive for Marie's serial murders is never clear. In her own confession, she claims she developed temporary feelings of pedophobia, the hatred of children, during her menstruation periods. Court psychologists declare Fikáčkova to be sane, but they acknowledge she is prone to depression, hysteria, and uncontrollable outbursts of anger. On October 4th, 1960, Maria Fikáčkova is sentenced to death for the 2 murders in February of that year. The courts are never able to confirm the earlier killings. On death row, Marie writes a letter to her mother.
Dear Mother, as you know, I am sentenced to death. It's very tragic, and I can't even think about it, that I will never be able to meet with you again. Because I still believe that there is some justice that will save me, but if not, I have to accept my fate.
On April 13th, 1961, Maria Fikáčkova is hanged at Bangrad's prison in Prague. For years, there is outrage over why the hospital staff took so long to recognize the horrible crimes she was committing. But it is difficult to even conceive that these individuals we trust with our very lives could ever be so heartless. Caregivers, nurses, and doctors who kill attack the fundamental fabric of society. A stay in a hospital is difficult for anyone, a time when we are at our most vulnerable. Adding to that, a fear those charged with saving lives might kill is something no human being should ever have to endure.